View of Democracy. My name is Ferenc Lotso. I will be your host today, and I'm thrilled to be bringing you our monthly special in partnership with the Journal of Democracy. Today's episode explores Richard Heydarian's insightful new article, The Philippines Dynastic Democracy, which has just appeared in the newest July 2025 issue of the Journal of Democracy that you may find at journalofdemocracy.org. Richard Heydarian is a senior lecturer at the University of the Philippines Asian Center and is also a columnist for the Philippine Daily Inquirer, who is a global affairs specialist, perhaps best known for his research and writing on Asian geopolitics and on current affairs and populism in the Philippines. Welcome to the Review of Democracy, Richard.
My pleasure, as always.
Thank you so much for agreeing to be on the show today. Now, your new article, The Philippines Dynastic Democracy, offers a fascinating interpretation of recent trends and the current political situation in the country. So how would you define a dynastic democracy? And how do the two major clans in the Philippines, that is to say the Marcoses and the Dutertes, operate? Would you say that they are conspicuously similar to each other in the way they are trying to conduct politics? Or are there perhaps important differences between them?
Well, again, thank you so much for the fantastic question and more than happy to join you folks. I mean, first of all, Philippines' political system has been described in so many ways. The great Benedict Anderson used the term cacique democracy. Others use the term elite democracy. I use the term elite democracy myself as a subtitle for my book on the rise of Duterte back in 2017. I just found terms like cacique democracy a bit too quaint and some would say archaic for my taste, because you have to Google what is cacique, right? And then look into the Latin American or American history and all. I just felt, maybe dynastic democracy. It's another oxymoron, by the way, just like elite democracy. But I think this kind of terminology or description better captures what's happening in the Philippines. Because if you look at the Philippines, I mean, we have a lot in common with Western nations because of the legacy of American colonialism. Our political system draws a lot from the American late 19th century political system, including its very much libertarian streak. If you look at our institutions, how they were established, it's a kind of very late 19th century libertarian state. And just as America had populism in the late 19th century, we also have had variations of that. Having said that, my contention is the Philippines is still an exceptional country, even not only definitely compared to West, but also compared to its immediate neighbors in Asia, and I would say also compared to its cousins in Latin America. Because going back to Benedict Anderson, his description of the Philippines was, this was the site of the last Republican Revolution among ex-Spanish colonies, because we were a Spanish colony before we became an American colony or Commonwealth. But also it was the first Republican Revolution in Asia and first liberal democracy in Asia, if not still the only liberal democracy in Southeast Asia. Having said all of those things, what makes the Philippines really unique, and this is where we go to the dynastic democracy description, is the tremendous amount of concentration of power among really a few families. So, whenever people are asking me why the Philippines elect someone like Rodrigo Duterete, why are the Marcoses back? I always say, why not when you look at the facts? And of course, my answer is not normative, it's empirical, it's conceptual. Because if you look at the Philippines, even at the height of reformist politics during the Benigno Aquino administration, when the Philippines was supposedly a rising liberal democracy, a new economic dynamo, even during the best days, the Philippine Congress, for instance, as many as 4 out of 5 elected offices were dominated by political dynasties. That's a staggering number that I think has no parallel in the world, even among Latin American and Asian countries. I mean, we can talk about the Thaksins in Thailand, we can talk about Kirchners in Argentina, we can talk about Bhuttos, for instance, in Pakistan, but none of these countries had more than a plurality of their parliamentary seats dominated by few political dynasties. In the Philippines, it's not only the congressional seats, and now increasingly even the nationally contested senatorial seats, where you see brother and sister, and two brothers again most recently, but also gubernatorial positions, mayoral positions. One of the funniest stories I had, or grim stories, was when a Russian diplomat, this is before they invaded Ukraine, so I was still talking to them back in the day, came to me and said, "Richard, what kind of democracy you have?" I look at the names of people in the local government office, it's all the same family name. And the only one that is not the same family name is actually either a mistress of the mayor or actually the son-in-law, right, with a different family name. That makes the Philippines exceptional in a very negative sense of the word. So fast forward, seeing the Philippine politics right now as a contest between two powerful dynasties, which are a variation on a theme, meaning a kind of an authoritarian populist dynasties, should not come as a surprise if you look at that kind of a longue durée understanding of Philippine political system.
Thank you so much. That's an amazing introduction to our subject. Now, this new article focuses primarily on the recent midterm elections that were held in May 2025, so very recently. So I wanted to ask you a bit about the kind of issues that dominated the campaign period, and whether you could say there were any major surprises in terms of the outcome and how you might want to account for those surprises.
Well, it was both shocking and not shocking, right? In a sense that, first of all, I was actually surprised that some of the issues that we felt were going to be defining issues, it didn't pan out that way. So we'll discuss that more later on. I mean, one of the things that is happening right now, which makes the Philippines unique, is that we're not only at the middle of a contest between two major dynasties, we're also in the middle of a contest between US and China. Because the Dutertes, the other side of this equation, are known as being, friendly to China, to put it mildly, while Marcos Jr. has kept a very good relationship with multiple American presidents, including the second Trump administration, which we'll discuss more. So I was expecting actually that one of the main issues would be foreign policy, right? So basically, you could imagine those aligned with the administration, the so-called Alianza or alliance members, would go really after the Duterte candidates and say they're pro-China stooges, and then the other side would say, oh, you're American boys, or basically American stooges, proxies, etc. It just didn't happen. In fact, one of the fascinating things about this election is that everyone, with one slight exception, played it safe, meaning everyone just really discussed just gut issues. So it was a competition about who's the most honest, effective, and who can best talk about education and health, etc. In fact, so much so that, again, we'll discuss that later on, when former President Rodrigo Dutertes was apprehended and handed over to the International Criminal Court, I was expecting not only the members of the alliance of the Marcos administration, but also the progressive opposition, which we'll discuss even more, would make it a central issue. And yet you also don't see that. So if you look at the top candidates of the opposition, I'm talking about the liberal opposition, another Aquino in this case, Bam Aquino, Paulo Benigno Aquino, and also former senator and vice presidential candidate Kiko Pangilinan, they talk about education, they talk about health, they talk about food, they have food vlogs, right and left, right? Gamers, right? So it was a very anodyne, policy-wise discussion, again, with some exception here and there. So that, for me, was very surprising. And I think we made predictions thinking this will be a very geopolitically foreign policy-specific elections. It didn't happen. Now, there are many theories. One theory was that many candidates were scared to criticize China because that would have affected their TikTok algorithm. And I can say that from my own experience, because a couple of times my TikTok just shut down or went weird and turned off, and I got even banned when I posted things critical of China. So considering how important TikTok was in these elections, and which brings us to the second part, especially among the youth, I think what we saw also in this election, which was interesting, is that you saw the Filipino voters showing tremendous amount of dynamism in terms of their preferences, and also their openness to turn a new page in Philippine politics. So the best example of that is if you look at the most known candidates in these elections for a global audience, well, I suppose you don't have to be a boxing fan to know Manny Pacquiao, right? Who was a former senator, former presidential candidate. He was barely top 14 or 15. He got really few votes. A couple of other people who used to top the race, who used to be also, actually they're still showbiz personalities, actors and all. A lot of these washed up celebrities or global celebrities like Pacquiao, they thought it's going to be a cakewalk. Next thing you know, it was really difficult for them, and a lot of them lost. So that tells you maybe the preference and the tastes of the voters is changing, that we are still a fiesta democracy, I would say, where, celebrities and showbiz and celebrity factor matters. But too many celebrities lost in this race for me to ignore that maybe something tectonic is happening. And my sense is, and the reason I say sense, is because unfortunately we don't have exit polls. I really don't know why. Maybe there's a financial reason. We're hoping to bring back exit polls. They're quite expensive, so I talked to many survey agencies. But because we don't have exit polls, we cannot give a scientifically certain answer. But it looks like, since for the first time the Gen Z, together with the younger millennials, became the biggest voting bloc, that introduced a new element in terms of voter preference, including unpredictability. That the surveys were not able to capture, that may explain why so many top celebrities, including like Manny Pacquiao, lost in this race. There was another senator who actually topped the Senate race back in 2010, Senator Bong Revilla. He also lost in this race. And he was so disappointed, he threatened to sue people who made fun of him, including some of the dance moves he did and all of that, and all of the antics and shenanigans. So that was another surprising thing. The other thing is that actually, and this is the central argument I felt in my piece, in my Journal of Democracy, which I felt is unique from all other takes, both journalistic and academic, is that I felt no one really won and no one really lost in this race. It was really a three-way asymmetric split. So the Alianza won. The reason why you cannot give a definitive answer is because the Philippines is a country of political butterflies. There are certain candidates I still don't know which side of the equation they are, including presidential sister Amy Marcos, right? So she ran under her brother and then she defected to the other side. And if you look at the number, actually her brother from the north, the solid north, delivered the vote for her more than the Dutertes. But anyway, and then there are other people like Camille Villar, who I don't know where to put her. Is she Alianza the other side? But you could say roughly out of the 12 nationally contested senatorial seats, around half went to the Alianza. Not fantastic, but not end of the world. The Duterte side, maybe 4 or 5. Actually 4, and then 2 from the opposition candidates who actually did very well. Bam Aquino was number 2, winning more than 20 million votes, and Kiko Pangilinan winning more than 15 million votes. Now, just for the purpose of our audience, in the Philippines, the senatorial seats are nationally contested, and every election cycle, 12 come in to fill in half of the outgoing senators in the 24-chamber body. Why is the senatorial seat very important? It's because one of the important issues they're discussing right now is whether they should impeach Vice President Sara Duterte, who's facing very serious charges. But at the same time, there are a lot of senators who are aligned to the Dutertes or fearing alienating Dutertes. So they're even trying not to have the trial to begin with. So some crazy constitutional crisis situation could happen in the Philippines. That is why the senatorial race was very important. But my contention is no one won a decisive victory in this race. There's just enough for the Alianza of Marcos Jr. to still define the tempo and cadence of politics. The Dutertes may also have won enough to shield Sara from impeachment, Sara Duterte from impeachment, and the progressive opposition, we'll discuss them more, I think have done also good enough to emerge as a potential third force. That's why for me, the race created even more confusion except at a higher level.
Thank you so much for that. That's a really rich and fascinating response. Now, one thing that many of our listeners will certainly know and have heard of in quite some detail is that former President Rodrigo Dutertes was arrested by the national police at Manila's airport back in March this year, and he soon surfaced at the International Criminal Court in The Hague. So first of all, how would you explain this actually quite unexpected decision to have him arrested? And how have the reactions been to this really important development in the Philippines? Would you say that this has already had some major political consequences until now?
Yeah, so a while ago when you asked me like how do you compare the Marcoses and Dutertes, I said they're a variation and a theme. But now what we're seeing is that the Marcoses also have 50 shades of politics, right? So Marcos Sr., I think everyone should know, this is Imelda Marcos. Basically your typical, third world dictatorship, right? Unfortunately, right? Codilismo, right? Very similar to what we had in Latin American countries. Dictatorship, human rights violation, corruption, so on and so forth. Marcos Jr., though, has evolved really strangely, and some would say positively surprisingly, right? So Marcos Jr., when he won as part of this unit team with Sara Duterte, everyone said it's game over. It's a double knockout. There's no way Philippine democracy is going to come back after 6 years of the father, Rodrigo Dutertes, who oversaw allegedly tens of thousands of extrajudicial killings, shutting down of biggest media network, pro-China policies, all sorts of crazy things. Basically, Orban of Hungary on steroids, right? To put it mildly. Now, going back to this, Marcos Jr., though, interestingly, evolved. So, earlier in the election, when he was trying to team up with the Dutertes, he was very much singing to the tune of Duterte's, like, let's be nice to China, US is unreliable, blah, blah, blah. And then once he won, suddenly he began to sing to a more reformist tune. But still, meaning he didn't engage in as much extrajudicial killings, he rolled back the crazy drug war of Duterte, he became more critical of China, more friendly to US, so on and so forth, more statesman-like. But nevertheless, he still didn't position himself as a liberal reformist, more technocratic reformist than liberal reformist. But as the fight between the Dutertes and Marcoses intensified, meaning former President Duterte last year coming out guns blazing saying this guy is a cocaine addict, we have to take him out, calling on the military to take him out, etc. Then later on, the daughter resigning from the cabinet as the Department of Education Secretary, then going guns blazing, threatening to assassinate more. So things got really out of control very fast, right? So very Pablo Escobar, very slowly, and then suddenly everything fell apart. Then Marcos suddenly was not only reformist, suddenly was even showing more openness to an element of liberalism, meaning cooperating with international human rights instruments like the ICC. So until January of this year, he officially said, we do not recognize the jurisdiction of the ICC because we took ourselves out of the Rome Statute back in 2018, which was the unilateral decision of Duterte. Long story, because some would say he couldn't do that without the Senate ratification, but that's a constitutional debate. But going back to this, suddenly Marcos began to change his tone and arguments, right? As the fight intensified with them, with the Dutertes, he became a bit more and more open to cooperating with the ICC. And then, as early as last year, October, I was saying, there could be a warrant of arrest anytime for, if not Duterte, some of his top supporters, including a senator or two who were Duterte-backed, and one of them used to be a police chief. But eventually what happened is that Marcos' argument began to change. When I say Marcos administration, meaning the Justice Secretary, the idea was that, okay, we do not recognize the ICC jurisdiction, but we don't want to be a pariah state, right? So if there is a warrant of arrest by the Interpol, hey, we don't want to be we don't want to be a rogue state, so we just have no choice but to cooperate with them, right? And with that justification, what happened is that, once Duterte came back from Hong Kong, and that's still a mystery, we don't know what happened. Was he in Hong Kong because he was seeking exile in China? Did he go to Hong Kong to do a test run and he realized, no, I don't want to be surrounded by MSS agents of China for the rest of my life? Did he go to Hong Kong thinking, if I come back to the Philippines, no one is going to touch me? Did he go to Hong Kong to actually check his bank accounts? Because that's also, maybe he has many. So we still don't know what exactly happened there. But what we know is that Duterte being Duterte, just like any demagogic figure, braggadocio, right? Proud, defiant. I'm going to come home. No one is going to touch me. So apparently the story I heard is that he had an option to fly straight with a private chartered plane from Hong Kong to a city aside from Manila, could be Cebu or Davao, his hometown. And logistically, that would take him a few days. But if he did that, no one could catch him. Now, Duterte being Duterte, he went cowboy. He went straight back to Manila, thinking he will have his supporters there at the airport waiting for him and no one will dare to touch him. What he didn't know is that the Philippine National Police, under a very interesting figure, PNP Chief, now PNP Chief Torre, and the Philippine military and intelligence services, they cooperated. And the moment he arrived in Manila, they immediately took him actually to our main Air Force base, Villamor Air Force Base. So by doing that, there was no way for his supporters to protect him. And then within hours, they cleared him. I was at The Hague and visited also, I was at The Hague, ICC, etc. And based on my conversation there, it looks like there were 2 stops before he went to The Hague. One, everyone knows, it's in United Arab Emirates. There was another one. So there was a lot of delay and all, but eventually it happened. They took him there. And you could see the Duterte camp were just in total shock. They did not expect the Marcos administration not only to go ahead with arresting Duterte, but to do it in this kind of a James Bond Mission Impossible way that they did it, right? But that's where things went wrong. I think Marcos administration became so confident, hey, we can the guy, good luck with that. Based on some of the people I talked to in Hague, they think, Duterte is going to rot there for the rest of his life. They think the cases are too heavy. But what happened here is that the other side, meaning the daughter of Duterte, vice president, they use that as a rallying point. Something that was quite predictable, to say this is not only an assault on the former president, it's an assault on all his supporters, especially those who come from marginalized sectors of society or from the south of the country, which has been historically marginalized. I won't say more because back then I said something about southern Philippines and it was taken out of context and I got persona non grata in some cities in the south. But basically the point is that they made this about the assault of this pesky, deracinated Northern Imperial Manila elite. How dare they put our guy in jail, cooperate with these pesky Western people? So that basic post-colonial dictatorship trope, right? That you would hear from the Gaddafis and Saddam Husseins of this world, right? So that was essentially the rallying point, and it worked. It worked because I think the administration really failed to provide a narrative to justify it. Because just a few months earlier, they were saying we don't even recognize the jurisdiction of this. So some of us are saying, naturally, Marcos Jr., he's going to have a State of the Nation address, like our State of the Union address soon. He should provide an explanation. Why did he cooperate with the ICC? Because a lot of Filipinos genuinely feel, this guy is too old, too frail, why did you do that to him? Right? And there are concerns also about his health and well-being, and that's why there are even applications for his interim release. But I'll keep it there because it's a multi-layered issue. All I'm just trying to say is that it happened in the middle of a very contentious elections, and the Duterte side really made the most out of it to gain national sympathy. And that may explain why they had 3 or 4 of their candidates winning in the Senate, which was quite a good performance by their side.
Oh, that's an amazing insider account, and I think you really pointed out several features of this really complex story that I think will be truly illuminating for our listeners. So thank you so much for that. Now, you already mentioned the broader geopolitical context, and I definitely wanted us to address that as well, since you have written several times that the Philippines can be considered a middle power, but it is also very much subject to the great global competition that is sharpening at the moment between the US and China. So I wanted to ask you a bit about how these two new superpowers have tried to impact the Philippines in recent years, and what might have changed now that Donald Trump is back in power for a second term in the US.
Yeah, so basically, first of all, I think the Philippines tends to be always dismissed as an American satellite state, as a kind of a small power and all, but people forget it's among top 15 most populous countries. We're almost as populous as Mexico. I don't think anyone calls Mexico a small country. Our GDP is on track to become $1 trillion GDP and among the top 20 biggest later in the century, maybe in a decade or two. It's massively investing in its armed forces, maybe not near enough. And, thanks to President Duterte, actually, I'll give it to President Duterte. He gave some sort of gravitas to the Philippines by initially trying to play the superpowers against each other. Although sometimes he went a bit too far by cussing at American leaders and schmoozing with Putin and talking about how he loves Xi Jinping and all of that. But I think those antics and theatrics indirectly help in terms of putting the Philippines on the global map. It's like, okay, what's going on with the Philippines? Apparently, they have a much more dynamic foreign policy or a dynamic debates over foreign policy than we thought. Now, obviously, I'm very critical of how things went after that, meaning Duterte really went too much into the China camp rather than protecting the Philippines' strategic autonomy. But I think what President Marcos Jr. is trying to do is actually build on that, and also the efforts of the Aquino administration in early 2010s when he leveraged international law to take China to international court. Remember, the Philippines is the only country in the world that has dared to take China to international court over major territorial, or in this case, maritime disputes. No other country has dared to do that. And the Chinese threaten us militarily, diplomatically, and economically, and yet we did that. So thank you to President Aquino and President Duterte. Somehow the Philippines, I think, got a sense of itself. I call it strategic agency, right? And that's what Marcos is trying to work with. But the problem there is that China is quite hostile to Marcos Jr. because they were expecting Marcos Jr. to be just another Duterte 2.0. Because Sara is there, Sara Duterte, the daughter, is there, and Marcos, the Marcos is actually a very good relationship with China historically. The father, Marcos Sr., was among first U.S. allies to normalize ties with China. In fact, there are pictures of Marcos Jr. with his mom, Imelda, I think 1975 or 1974, with Mao Zedong, right? So he was part of the normalization of ties. So there are ties that bind with China. So I think China really expected too much. And once Marcos began to assert a little bit of room for maneuver and try to repair ties in the West, I think they were very disappointed with that. And I think this is where China miscalculated because they thought they could use the Dutertes as a node to put pressure on Marcos, and that has backfired big time. And the Americans, both under Biden and Trump's 2.0, have also been very smart in exploiting that. This idea that, hey, if China is investing in the opposition to Marcos, then Marcos will be more amenable to working with us, right? And I think that so far is working well for both sides. Just to give you an idea, as you know, Trump is very anti-ICC. He has sanctioned the International Criminal Court because of the Netanyahu situation, but he said nothing about the ICC arrest of Duterte. Even when Duterte said, "My pal Trump, like come and help me," like some of his supporters even wrote letters to Putin and I don't know, even to Trump asking for help. Like, you're helping Netanyahu, maybe you want to help your other friend, etc. Because Duterte and Trump had that let's call it populist international bromance at one point in time in history. But anyway, so actually, the way things have worked is that Marcos, by trying to be more autonomous and independent in his foreign policy, ended up becoming more aligned with the US against China, because China was also expecting him. So this is the game theory situation where many parts are moving at once. So you're absolutely right. In theory, the Philippines could become, similar to Vietnam, or some would even say Indonesia. We have enough size and weight to kind of play in between superpowers, and multi-alignment is the term that the Indians use. But I think the reality is that for the Philippines, first, there's that complex dynamic of transition from Duterte to Marcos, and how China is trying to push its case, which has alienated Marcos. Not to mention, everyone talks about debt trap. China had pledge trap. Like they pledged billions right and left. Nothing really came in, really in terms of big ticket investments, infrastructure investments, while the Japanese have invested a lot. The Americans are hoping to invest more. So what I'm saying here is that there was a lot of contingency that explains where we are today. It's not like Marcos came in and said, "I'll be anti-China and pro-US." It's not like, China, just made this policy out of nowhere. But having said that, there's a second element to this, and the second element is the Philippines is also on the front line, on two fronts, basically. Actually, two front lines. One is the South China Sea disputes, where the Philippines is a direct rival to China, and we're actually the only Southeast Asian country openly standing up to China and criticizing China. And we have had some tussles with him. But the second one, and I think this is where things get very sensitive, Taiwan. From here in Manila to Taipei, sometimes it takes just 1 hour of flight. From northern Philippines to southern Kaohsiung, for instance, and Lawag, where Marcos, it's just a 40 minutes flight. We're so close to Taiwan. So geographically, it's impossible for us to be untethered, let's say, from that geopolitical equation. So what's also happening in the past few years is that the Philippines is kind of leveraging its proximity to Taiwan to get more American support to build up its own capability vis-a-vis China on the South China Sea issue. So there's this kind of an issue linkage, if I can put it that way, whereby suddenly South China Sea and Taiwan, all of them are coming together, and suddenly the Philippines is becoming a very important frontline state. Kind of like how Poland is a very frontline state in Europe vis-a-vis Russia. We're becoming basically Poland of Asia. I'm not talking about 19th century Poland, obviously. I'm talking about 21st century Poland. And so, ideally, we want to be more like Poland, which is like Poland is a key NATO ally, US ally, but it still has its own agencies and ideas, right? Sometimes it even tells US and the NATO how to approach this, right? We want to be like that. But the problem is that I don't think domestically, for instance, Poland, the fight between the right and left, is in the same way it is in the Philippines. Because in the Philippines, the Duterte-Marcos dynastic fight is really, really binary, in the sense that one wants to distance from the West and one wants to distance from China as healthily as possible, even though I think both sides may have some logic to their argument. But personally, I think Marcos gets the foreign policy question more right than ever. But nevertheless, just to show the stakes here, the other thing that is also happening in the Philippines is that it's becoming like, the Vienna or the Berlin of Asia. And I'm talking about, Cold War Berlin. We are a journal of democracy, right? The notion of sharp power was, I think, first elucidated in our journal, Journal of Democracy. And we very much see sharp power operations here in the Philippines. So during elections and way before elections, there are considerable evidences and arrests that show that China has been engaged in sharp power operations. We're not only talking about their friendship with the Dutertes, we're talking about espionage activities, foreign interference operations, and even deep fake attacks against President Marcos Jr. So we're at the front line also in terms of sharp power operation, not only this big picture geopolitical competition.
Thank you so much for that really nuanced take on this very contingent situation, also for this really illuminating comparisons, historical and also to various European cases. I think that really helps us understand the stakes and what is really going on at the moment. Now, you close this article with a section titled kingmakers or third force.
Right.
And this is a part that really concerns the quite limited but also really significant successes that liberal progressive candidates achieved at the recent midterms that you already discussed to some extent, and you already mentioned this, but I really wanted to return to this because I really think that there's much more to discuss here. First of all, did you expect liberal progressives to be able to challenge this dynastic democracy that you have characterized so aptly, and to really emerge as a kind of third force in the coming years? What are some of the major obstacles they would have to overcome, and what kind of strategy might actually work for them to really overcome those obstacles at the moment?
Yeah, it's a question mark for a reason, right? Because I think the kingmaker part is yet to be seen, and it's, to be honest, a bit aspirational. So just to mention the Senate, right? Getting 2 out of 12 is not like a majority. It's barely even a minority, right? So yes, they ranked very well. Bam Aquino and Kiko Pangilinan, they got a lot of votes. That shows a lot of success. But it also remains to be seen whether that success was more contingent than structural. Why? Because it's also very possible that they did very well in that race because both sides saw them as a third force to check the other side. So they became, there was like a perfect storm, all stars aligned in a sense that, like the Dutertes saw these liberals as anti-Marcos because of the history of Marcos Duterte. So maybe if they're there in the Senate, they could help us. So let's put them on our, sample ballots. That's what we have in the Philippines. So, because there are so many candidates, more than 60 candidates, different campaign groups give sample ballots to voters. And then also negotiate command votes on the ground. That's quite unique to some, fledgling democracies, to put it mildly. But my sense is the other side also felt the same. They felt like, this liberal opposition people were also hammered and oppressed during the Duterte 6 years. Maybe if they're also there in the Senate, they'll do right. And then also in credit to give them due credit, they're also known as being really not corrupt, right? Really clean, good governance people, which I felt made them also palatable to voters across the political spectrum, especially now with both sides accusing each other of corruption. Like Sara Duterte, the vice president, is facing impeachment over allegations of massive corruption. Then the other side is saying, oh no, you're alleging that we stole millions. Well, you guys stole billions. You want to talk about Marcos Duterte? So at least in that environment, they come out as really a third force in the sense that they're palatable to people across the political spectrum. So maybe that was just a contingency of the elections. Does that mean that they can replicate that situation in 2028 when it's going to be a presidential race and it's like really head to head, right? You're no longer going to have Duterte siding with you because they'll have their own candidate, and you can only choose one presidential candidate, not 1 out of 12 senators, right? So there's also that structural versus contingency argument. But the other one is that, as I said, we still don't have the exit polls, because what I want to understand is, are the new generation voters and first-time voters, first of all, are they going to stick around until 2020? Are they hopeful enough to vote in 2020? And how much are they open and receptive to the kind of good governance and pluralistic democratic message that the progressive opposition is putting forward? Again, that remains to be seen. That's why I put a lot of question marks. And third, even if, let's assume, the voters are palatable, the young voters are open to their messaging, which is, aren't we sick and tired of these dynasties and all their drama and all their craziness? It's time for something fresh, new, or at least something better, right? And assuming that what happened in 2025 elections was not contingent, basically luck, right? And that this really showed the compelling message and the personality and campaign that the progressive candidates had. Assuming all of those things are true, it raises another question, which is, will they be unified heading into 2028? So if you look at the elections in Turkey, elections most recently in Poland, elections in Czech Republic, and soon also in Hungary, you had united opposition, whereby basically everyone is anti-Orban or anti-Erdogan. They're going to team up, and that's why the races were so close, 49-51 or 48-51. My worry in the Philippines is that I'm not certain whether we can move in that direction, because as we speak, there are already competing narratives and competing efforts on who is going to be the standard bearer for the progressive opposition. The reason why I say I hyphenated progressive liberal is that it's not also monolithic, right? So we can just say these are the pluralistic forces. Some of them are more liberal centrist, some of them are progressive center left. And as we speak, there are at least three major figures who could be the standard bearer with very different approaches. One is the former Vice President Leni Robredo, who just won the mayoral race, and I think she'll be very competitive. She wanted to run. She was first runner-up in the previous race. She won a lot of votes against all odds, and some people feel maybe she needs another run, kind of like Lula, right? Lula, how many times she run? Maybe if she has another chance, she'll do much better. And then there are other people are saying that maybe we need someone who's more progressive, feisty, and scrappy, right? So that's where Senator Riza Ontiveros comes in, who comes from the Social Democratic Akbayan Party, which topped the party list race. It's kind of it's a party proportional voting competition for supposedly marginalized groups. And the Akbayan Party of Senator Riza Ontiveros did very well. They got the most vote, I think, historically ever for any party list. So some are saying maybe she should run as a standard bearer. And then I mentioned another name, Bam Aquino, who comes from the prominent Aquino families. Everyone thought the Aquinos are over, just like, I don't know how people talk about Obamas or Clintons nowadays in the US. Like, that brand is over. But he brought it back, and he was number 2 out of 60 candidates, won more than 20 million votes, and he's young, or relatively young, and I think his messaging will be, I am the new generation of liberal pluralistic. So, are there going to be primaries? What are the mechanisms for them to unify around a single candidate? Because if they don't do that and they split the vote across liberal center versus progressive center left, then I think there's a very high chance that the Dutertes will win back. If not Sara Duterte, someone from this Duterte camp. And one of them that I keep an eye on is the person who topped the race in the Senate, Senator Christopher Bongo, who used to be the consigliere / errand boy / assistant of Rodrigo Duterte, the former president. And he seems to have a very formidable machine and very much the message discipline that none of the Dutertes have. And some are thinking maybe he's also setting his eye on the presidency. If ever Sara Duterte is politically damaged, or even she is basically taken out of equation if an impeachment happens later this year.
Thank you so much for that thorough response. That has also really allowed us to look ahead. And thank you so much for the entire conversation today, Richard.
My pleasure. I know I kind of over-explained. We went 5 to 10 minutes above, but I'm not sure, how much people are familiar with the nitty-gritties and nuances and the very 50 shades of Philippine politics. So I hope I didn't over-explain. And thank you so much. I'm looking forward to joining you for other discussions in the future, French. Thank you.
Not at all. I think this is exactly what we're looking for, real depth and real precision. And I think you have provided a lot of both. So thank you so much once again. I have been discussing with Richard Haydarian today, who is the author of the new article, The Philippines Dynastic Democracy, which you can find in the newest July 2025 issue of the Journal of Democracy. I hope you have enjoyed our conversation apropos this important new article. Until the next conversation here at the Review of Democracy.
Thank you.
Recording stopped.
Brilliant. I think you were